This is a Dynamics 365 podcast focusing on the ingredients of a successful Dynamics 365 practice. Your host is Business Solution MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as NZ365 Guy. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn by searching for NZ365 Guy, or if you want to engage my professional services, go to cloverbase.com. For more information on this interview, show notes, feedback and resources mentioned, or to suggest a guest for future episodes, please go to nz365guy.com/podcast. Thanks to iNorgic for sponsoring the Dynamics 365 Practice Podcast. Maplytics by iNorgic is a market-leading, certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualization and routing capabilities within Dynamics CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage right customers at the right time. Maplytics now works with Dynamics 365 version 9 and Dynamics 365 app for mobile and tablets. iNorgic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 solutions, as well as a cost-effective and high-quality programming services. Hi everyone, I'm here with Mohamed, Mostafa, and in this episode we're going to be focusing on general data protection regulation and how it applies to Dynamics 365. Mohamed, thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about GDPR.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
Mohamed, can you tell me a bit more detail about your background, not just what you've done with Dynamics, but tell us a bit about your family and what gets you excited?
You know, I really get excited about Microsoft Dynamics innovation, the cloud, all the new features. I wouldn't say a geek as such, but I really love technology and I enjoy it. I guess one of the main things I do is, within business is to try new things. But even in my free time, I do some IoT, try a few things like machine learning, bots, and few things. Try them out. You know, not an expert, but I really enjoy doing that. Part of that, I got two sons, and they love technology, and we do spend some time doing things together until they get bored and they start playing PlayStation or Xbox.
And so you're involved in CRM Saturdays as well, is that right?
Yeah, that's true. As you might have heard, Dynamics 365 Saturday, which used to be called CRM Saturday, but now with a new branding, it was started with Raz Chowdhury in the UK here in Manchester, and he reached out to me, and I think it's almost a year and a half now, and we had the first big one in London about a year and a bit ago, and then since then we've been doing one in every city, in every major city around the world, and each one is led by the local MVP or local experts in their respective countries.
So let's get down to business and talk about General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR as everyone is calling it. What's the layperson's view of it, and what does this mean for business?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting subject. Maybe not very exciting, but it's interesting and definitely quite important for lots of organizations in the EU, in Europe, and also outside Europe. So it's a regulation by the EU Parliament, the EU Council, and the EU Commission, and it really aims to strengthen and unify data protection. If I were to say there are two main objectives that GDPR has, or at least from my point of view, there are two main objectives. Number one is to give back control to citizens and residents of the EU over their personal data. It's really important because if you think about all the recent hacks and data breaches that happened, lots of EU citizens found that their data were kept by organizations, firms, and companies which they've never agreed to, or they forgot about it. The second objective is that it aims to simplify the regulatory environment for international business. So if you think about it as a business who wants to come and work with the EU, previously they have 27 member states, 27 countries. Each one of them has its own data protection act. So they had to comply with the 27 different data protection acts. But now with the GDPR, it aims at unifying that into one regulatory environment that you need to comply to. So once you comply to it, you comply to 27 countries' data protection, and you can do business easier with them.
So you talked about what data someone keeps on you as an organization. If I wanted to validate what a company was keeping on me, or decide whether they should be able to keep that information, how would you go about that?
So one of the biggest changes in GDPR that GDPR is bringing is that it gives consumers some new rights. Some of these rights might already exist, and some of them may have existed but in a slightly different way, and some of them are completely new. So number one, you have the right to access your data. So this is the right for, and what we call data subjects in this case is the natural person who have the right to access their data. So I can go into any technology provider, any company that has my information or that I believe they might have my information, and I can ask them to give me control and access to all the data, all the information they have against me. So this is one right that I get with GDPR. I also have the right to correct this data. So if you have information about me in your organization, but this information is incorrect, I have the right to contact you and ask you to correct it, and you have the obligation to change it as an organization. And the third right, obviously there are more than that, but the third right is the right to be forgotten. So I can go to an organization and say, you know what, I gave you consent a few years ago or a few months ago to have access to my data, maybe for customer service, maybe for marketing, but you know what, I withdraw that consent and I ask you, and I have the right to be forgotten, so I ask you to completely delete and erase any data you hold about me. They have to comply with this within the boundaries of any legal requirements, which we can talk about a little bit more if you want later or now. But it's basically, if you have as a legal requirement, you might have as an organization a legal requirement to hold customer data for up to 5 years because you have done business financial transactions with them. So I bought a service from you. I can't just go and wipe that transaction, or I can't go and just wipe the name of the customer of this transaction, because that will put me into the money laundry area, which obviously is another regulation. So as long as you have other legal obligations to keep this data, the organization doesn't have to delete it. However, every organization has to delete the data that they do not require for this legal obligation. So as a simple example, you might have had a financial transaction with company A. Company A, as part of that transaction, held your name, your address, but also they held your Twitter account and LinkedIn profile and maybe additional information. They actually only need your name and address for the transactional information, which is a legal obligation. So when you contact them and say, please wipe out my data, they can wipe out everything except the personal identifiable information, PI, that are related to this transaction, which they can't delete for 5 years for regulatory reasons. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, totally. So tell me, if I wanted to drill into more resources to personally understand about GDPR, what would I be looking for? Where would I find it?
So I would say the first point is to actually go and look at the EU Commissioner website. So the EU Commissioner website, it's a dedicated website for everything around privacy and data protection. And obviously, once you go there, you'll find GDPR all over it. It's a massive thing that is coming, that is hitting every business in the EU and outside. So there are lots and lots of resources. And you might think that, it's going to be really boring to read the whole GDPR regulation, which I would probably agree. It was very long nights when I had to go through it and read it line by line. However, there are lots of discussions, Q&A, light information that you can gain some experience and some knowledge about GDPR from. In addition to that, especially talking within the Microsoft Dynamics context, Microsoft is taking GDPR really seriously, and we can talk about that later. But what they've done is on the Microsoft Trust Center, which is microsoft.com/Trust Center, you will find a lot of information about GDPR. You can also go to microsoft.com/GDPR, and they have a whole website just dedicated to GDPR. They talk about how GDPR affects Microsoft services, Microsoft Cloud, Microsoft licenses, how it affects Microsoft partners and Microsoft customers. So it's really informative website.
In your opinion, is GDPR a good thing, and why?
Well, I think it's to be honest, it's about time. GDPR has always been something that, as an EU citizen, if you step outside of the regulatory compliance, and as an organization or as a business, how much challenge you're facing with GDPR. If you think about it as an individual, as an EU resident, it's really giving me back my control over my data and my personal data. So there is an argument to say it is actually a long overdue, and that with the changes that happened with the business, with the technology in the last 10 years or even last 5 years, there is a lot of data that has been breached, a lot of challenges, which I think it makes GDPR really just about time.
So GDPR covers a host of things. There are something like 99 articles in all. What are the key ones that affect that are affecting people in the Dynamics 365 community that they need to be aware of?
Very good question. So when I do this discussion and this workshop, I try to kind of bring the GDPR context into Dynamics 365. And I always feel that there are three main areas that impact Dynamics. There are more, and there is no right and wrong answer, but I feel that number one is the consumer rights, number two is data categorization, and number three is consent and data access. Let me quickly go through each one of them. Number one is when it comes to designing a Dynamics 365 system with the new consumer rights that we talked about, such as subject access requests, right to be forgotten, data portability, to prevent profiling, stop direct marketing, all these new consumer rights, they require the Dynamics 365 designer, consultant, professional architect, they all need to be thinking about this as part of their design of the Dynamics 365 solution. What they can't do is leave Dynamics 365 security design to the end. It means that you have to start looking at the security design of the whole organization. That includes business units, organization structure, teams, access teams, owner teams, field level security, the whole thing of office security roles, how you're going to split your data, all of that has to be designed really early on, and you can no longer leave it to the end. So that's for consumer rights. Number two, data categorization. This is about the personal identifiable information that you capture about your customers. Previously, CRM was all about, capturing as much information as you can about your customer. And you can still do that, but you have to have a good business justification for each piece or each field of data you're capturing on a dynamic CRM form. Why are you capturing this data? Where who's gonna access this data, where they're gonna access it, and when they're gonna access it. Always think about those four questions. Why, who, when, and where. Because you might be capturing data that is really sensitive information and you're giving everyone access to it without a good business justification. For example, someone's sexuality, you don't really need to know this information unless some organizations, like some of the organizations I'm working with, they have a regulatory requirement to report on all the different ethnicities and sexualities that they help, because they are non-for-profit and they have to report on that on an annual basis. But that doesn't mean you give access to everyone in your organization to the sexuality of your customers or the ethnicity or any of other sensitive data. So you still need to capture it, but you need to design your system in a secure way so that only a subset, a very small group of users with the right permissions can access this data. And then the third element of this is the consent and data access. So now that you have to give consent as an EU citizen to an organization to capture your data, you as an organization and you as a Dynamics 365 consultant or professional, you have to design the system to allow for the maintenance. Or first, you obtain that consent, you ensure that consent is always valid, so you maintain it, and then you renew it at the right time. So if I give you consent for customer service reasons to capture my data for 12 months, before the 12 months finish, you have to have a process, and preferably an automated process. I would argue it has to be an automated process where Dynamics 365 alerts a group of users that this consent is about to be invalidated, or it's about to be to end. So once that happens, they have to go and renew it before the expiry date. Also, if I call you and I say I withdraw my consent, we have to have a process, both business process as well as a technical design in your system to allow you to withdraw, to allow the customer to withdraw that consent. Finally, you have to have a process to invalidate consents and renew them in an automated way. Because if you try to renew the consent and you can't get the customer approval, then you have to go and look at how you're going to erase this data. What data is financial, what data is regulatory that you have to keep, and what data you cannot keep, such as marketing data, in which case you will have to literally wipe it out. So those are three main areas. I usually take about an hour just talking about those three areas, so I'm not going to take more than that. But it is a big consideration for any design of a Dynamics 365 system.
Yeah, so I take it that there would need to be some type of robust audit trail. And also when you talk about automating that, that consent to keep the data after 12 months, are you proposing like automated email that maybe go to a portal as such that have the confirmation questions to be validated by that individual? How are you proposing that automation works?
Absolutely. I think with Dynamics 365, there is a very powerful workflow engine. And when I talk about workflow here, I'm referring to the whole workflow, including the custom plugins, the custom actions, the custom workflow activities. But there is a lot of tools and features that allow you to automate all these kind of processes. There is the how to obtain the consent, how you're going to design it in the system. But then you have to have a workflow to maintain that consent and make sure that if it's due to be renewed, you send out a notification, an email, you create a task in a queue for a dedicated team, your data stewardship team, for example, to go on and try to renew that consent. So that could be a simple workflow, literally a standard workflow that every day goes and checks which consents are due to expire in the next 30 days. Any consent that satisfy those conditions, you push it into a queue for someone to go and renew it. That could be one simple task. Another more sophisticated one is that you automatically send an email to the customer to say, your consent is due to expire. Can you please confirm that you're happy for us to continue to hold your data? And if the customer approves it, it then goes and updates Dynamics 365. So it completely takes out any manual intervention from any users at this point, except in the cases where there is an exception. So if the customer doesn't respond or if the customer says no, then you can create a new exception workflow which requires some manual intervention. So that's just one example. But talking about audit data, there are a number of built-in security in Dynamics 365 that can give you a lot of leverage over your audit data. For example, if you're using Dynamics 365 in the cloud, there is a very simple option which is available for all customers to go and create your own encryption key in Dynamics 365. It might be that everyone does this, or it might be that actually not a lot of people don't. In my experience, I actually met a lot of customers and partners who don't do this. And this is simply going in, create your own encryption key, and you keep it within your organization. What that means then is your data is encrypted at rest in Microsoft data centers. So if there is any breach, well, for whatever reason, you have very good evidence and facts about what you've done to protect your data. Because remember, when it comes into investigations of GDPR compliance, it's not just about the breach has happened or not. It's about what have you done before that happens to prepare yourself for GDPR, for data protection. So these are very simple features that are available in Dynamics. Also, with the audit data, you can always export your audit data into a separate standalone database where you can keep it for longer periods, shorter periods, and you clean up your Dynamics 365 data from this audit data. So maybe every 3 months, any audit data that is older than 3 months gets pushed into another database, which has its own workflow and process and so on.
So if, let's say I'm running Dynamics already, what do I need to be aware of, or what do I need to look at in my system now to kind of get it in compliance for the 25th of May 2018 when this comes into effect?
So I think there are lots of things that needs to be done. First, on a high-level organization level, every organization has to do a full assessment of their data protection, both policies as well as technologies. So this is almost a requirement to have regular internal assessments and internal audit of your data protection policies and how they are implemented in technologies. So that's number one, and that goes way beyond Dynamics 365. That goes across every system of record. Number two, if we go down into Dynamics 365, the first thing that any organization should do, and I always recommend that to my customers, is to go and identify what are the personal identifiable information that you currently store within Dynamics 365 about your customers. A very simple way of doing this, you have a spreadsheet. You on the first column, you put in every single field that would identify a customer. This includes name, email, geolocation, date of birth, national insurance numbers, any information that can be used to identify a customer. Let's say you ended up with 100 fields on your first column. The second column should always be why. Why are you capturing this data? What's the business justification? You have to capture that. So again, if there is a breach, you have to go and say, I capture this data because these are the business justifications for it. A third column, or maybe a fourth column, you will need to go and say who can access this data. So we now have the justification to capture it, but we need to know who. So it goes back to the who, why, and where. And where is very important because you might be capturing certain data that is very important for you to run your day-to-day business activities within the organization. But that doesn't mean that anyone on a mobile device can go and access this data, because you could restrict this data to be online only within your network, for example. You don't want to allow it an offline capability, or you might want to not even allow it to any mobility. There are certain things that you have to consider as part of that. So that once you build this kind of matrix, and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of input from the business as well as consultants to make sure you've got that model. Once you have that model, you will find out which fields I no longer need and I can wipe it out completely, which fields I definitely need and why, and which fields I need but it's certain circumstances. So you build up the security, the data access workflow around these.
So who's affected by the new regulations? Like, let's take the customer from that point of view. You know, when this kicks into effect in the 25th of May 2018, is there any action that a customer is going to need to take straight away?
So as an individual, as a data subject, as GDPR defines a person, there isn't anything specific that you need to do. However, from that date, you have more rights. So this kind of marketing company that keeps on sending you email marketing, you can always email them back and say, according to GDPR regulation, please stop emailing me, and ask you to completely wipe out my data. Or the other companies that keep on calling you without your permission, you tell them, exactly the same thing. So you've got more rights. To be fair, you can still do this now, but you've got a lot more rights, and there's a lot more hype around GDPR that many organizations will reconsider their positions when it comes to GDPR and data compliance. So that's really from a customer perspective. You can always go back to a number of your previous service providers. You can go and ask them to completely delete it. Right.
So I've been in situations where I've unsubscribed from an organization. Let's say it was an airline that I've traveled on once. They started sending me marketing material post my ticket purchase, and often it's a little checkbox that is already pre-checked on the form when you're completing it, and you've auto subscribed into their marketing material. So let's say I unsubscribe, and for whatever reason they refresh their database. Like I've been across a lot of organizations that don't have any consistency or a single data set. They have multiple. They refresh it from different old archaic systems, and so 2 months later I'm getting email again from them. Could I then go back and say, on this date, I asked you to stop or unsubscribed, you're still continuing? What's my next step of recourse, if you like, from that point?
Yeah, so the first step is actually you can report this organization to your local member state information commissioner. So information commissioner, there is an information commissioner in every country. So here in the UK information commissioner is the first point of contact if you want to report a data breach or you want to report an organization that is breaking GDPR compliance and regulations. Number two, you have to understand that with the GDPR, as an organization and as an individual, we all need to understand that now consumers have the right to ask for compensation for misusing their data. So if you have responded back to them and said, do not send me marketing information, and they continue to send marketing information, you can, number one, report them. Number two, you can actually take them to a small, I can't remember the name now, but it's small penalty courts or something like that, where you actually go and ask, you can take them to a court to say, well, those guys have not, they have broken the data protection regulation with me, and I would like a compensation for the misuse of my data. So you can actually take organizations to court because of GDPR.
And I take it there wouldn't be long before precedent will be set around the world, and then that'll be kind of like the standard for a breach, if you like.
Exactly, and I think GDPR is a new thing. It's a new regulation for everyone. So there will be teething issues. There will be things that not everyone knows about. I personally, obviously, do not claim to know everything about GDPR. But as you said, as precedents start to happen, as breaches start to happen, as customers start to use their rights, there will be a common understanding of how best to handle these things. But the biggest advantage is that you will be able to report any kind of breaches or any kind of organization that is targeting you without your consent.
Gotcha. So how's this regulation going to affect Dynamics 365 partners? So not from a point of view that the partner is actually storing this information, but the fact that they're working on their customers' implementations. Is there any risk or responsibility that a partner organization has on them?
Yes. So currently, according to the Data Protection Act in the UK, for example, all the compliance and all the regulation applies to controllers. Controllers are the organizations that hold the information. So, for example, Bank X holds a lot of information about customers. So they are the data controllers. However, a processor, could be a Microsoft partner, has full access to this data because they need to test it, they need to build the dynamic CRM system. What currently happens is that if there is a breach, the only organization that is on the hook, really, by the data commissioner are the controllers. Processors might still be under a legal obligation towards the controllers, so the partner is still under data protection legal obligation for the controller, and the controller might take, or the bank might take, the partner to court because they caused that breach. But at the moment, the information commissioner will only target the controllers. They are the ones on the hook. With GDPR, they are both equally obliged to conform to GDPR compliance. So it significantly increases the legal obligation on data processors, in our case, Microsoft Dynamics partners. And here we're talking about any partner who has access, maintenance, or ability to process data of a customer or of the customer's customers, and who have access to this data. They are obliged to conform to everything about GDPR. So if we take a step back, as a Microsoft partner, I need to understand who have access to my bank customers. I need to know who have access to this and why do they have access to it. I have to show my own compliance around this area. In addition to that, I have to restrict data access when it doesn't make sense. For example, why would you have the ability to export data to Excel, which is a very nice feature and very simple and easy to do in Dynamics 365, but it breaks the GDPR compliance if you give it to those users who don't have the right to. So as a partner, I have to understand who can export this data. Otherwise, you could end up with a consultant in your organization causing a breach, even if unintentional, but that could lead to millions of pounds of penalties for you as a partner.
Okay, so then looking at their responsibility or how it affects Microsoft and actually at a platform level, what responsibility do you see there? Yeah,
so Microsoft, and believe me when I tell you, Microsoft is doing a lot of hard work behind the scenes, and I'm sure you're aware and you're involved in lots of these discussions. But as MVPs, we work very closely with the product team, and I personally work with the product team that is responsible of implementing GDPR in Dynamics. I found that there is a huge amount of work across the whole organization about GDPR. One of the main challenges Microsoft has is that as a cloud provider, a cloud vendor, they are actually 100% data processors. They are processors. They are under 100% obligation to ensure there are restrictions who in their organization can access customers' data. Again, going back to the bank example, if a bank has their data in the cloud, they satisfy all the regulatory requirements, but someone who's not authorized working for Microsoft or on behalf of Microsoft access this data. Even if a breach didn't happen, they have broken the data protection regulation. So Microsoft is going through every single system, every single back-end telemetry database. Even every time you log in, it's captured in Dynamics 365 behind the scenes in Microsoft Cloud, who logged in, when and why, and so on. They have to go through all of this and see what information they're capturing, why they're capturing it, and do they need to capture it. So, for example, I know for a fact that they're going to anonymize access to Dynamics 365 in their telemetry databases. So they will keep the GUID, which can link back to Dynamics 365 records, but they will not keep the name of the customer. This was something mentioned in Microsoft Directions conference by a Microsoft speaker. And it was very interesting to find out that they're really working hard behind the scenes to make sure they are compliant. Think about it from a Microsoft perspective. The maximum penalty for GDPR is 4%. This means if Microsoft is found to be in breach, or any similar organization, this is 4% of their global revenue for the previous financial years. This is 4 billion. We're talking about 4 billion penalty. It's not the revenue 4 billion, it's 4 billion penalty. It's a massive amount of money. Obviously, this is the extreme case. This is the absolute maximum penalty, but we're talking about 4 billion penalty, which is massive. So Microsoft is taking this very seriously, and many organizations are taking this very seriously, because if you weigh the pros and cons of doing something about GDPR or doing nothing, you will find that doing something and even spending money on getting your organization GDPR ready is definitely worth the money when it comes to penalties and being in compliance. And that not only applies to countries in the EU, because remember, GDPR applies to any company in the whole world that captures data about EU citizens. So if you are a US company, if you are a New Zealand company, if you're an Australian company, you have to comply with GDPR if you're capturing any EU residents' data.
Wow, that's pretty broad.
It is, absolutely.
So what about, let's drop it down to the last level there, which is a Dynamics 365 consultant. Let's say I'm a functional BA, an architect, or a developer. What do I need to be aware of in regards to GDPR and how it affects my day-to-day job?
So I think the first important thing that every time I do this session, I always get the question or the wow when I explain that this applies to even a small limited company that has one person, one consultant. So let's say you're a contractor and you're a one-person limited company. You're still a limited company. You are an incorporated entity, which means you have to comply with GDPR. Now, you might not have to do exactly what other big organizations are doing, so you don't have to have your own data protection or data controller in-house. You don't have to have every month kind of data compliance assessments, but at the same time, you have to comply with GDPR, and the penalties will apply on you. It's 4% of your global revenue in the past financial year, or 20 million euros, whichever is greater. So as a single consultant, if you are in a really bad data breach problem and you got convicted as a business, you are talking about a maximum penalty of 20 million euros if your annual revenue is less than that. And that's massive amount. Many businesses could close down with something like this. So you have to take it seriously. You have to think about, I'm just sending this information to myself. I'm just emailing this to my personal account. I'm sending this customer a spreadsheet because I want to try it on a separate virtual machine. You can't do that unless you are within the boundaries of the data protection policies with your customer, with your Microsoft partner, or within your own organization.
So let's focus now on Dynamics 365 and how the technology needs to be adapted to meet compliance. And one of the things I'm going to touch here is around read audit. And one of my questions is and that at the moment that functionality is not in the platform. So identifying when somebody actually accesses or views a record. So can you tell me what needs to change today at a platform level in Dynamics 365 to better enable or enact the GDPR?
I think it would be fair to say that there is a lot of work that needs to be done on the whole audit module within Dynamics 365 to get it closer and closer and easier for customers and partners to be compliant with GDPR. As you mentioned, number one is who's accessing the customer data, who access this record. It might be that they have the right to access the data, but you also still need to know who accesses it and when. So that's not there. Now, Dynamics 365 is a platform, as we all know, that you can extend to do whatever you want. So you can implement this data yourself. But some of this data is really essential from a platform perspective that we really need Microsoft, the product group, to work on. Now, we're obviously under NDA, so we can't give lots of information, but I know for a fact that there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes to bring Dynamics very closer to GDPR compliance. So auditing is one area. Accessing audit is important. However, you can do this yourself. You can implement this yourself. It might require some custom development, but it's an investment that is worth doing now to ensure you're in compliance.
So how specifically is this going to affect marketing for organizations?
Departments and teams within every organization that is really hit hard with this is marketing. One of the important things that many organizations will need to realize, and if they haven't already, is that consent is by service. So you could give consent for customer service to our organization A, but that doesn't mean organization A can do marketing and send you marketing material. You have to have explicit consent for a specific function. So you might have to end up splitting your consent into multiple consents, or you might have one big consent, but you split it into areas. So we have customer service consent and marketing consent. But remember that every consumer, every data subject, they have the right to withdraw consent for one area and leave another consent for another. So they can give you consent for customer service and marketing, but a month later they withdraw consent from marketing, in which case you have to oblige, stop sending them marketing material, but you continue to provide them anything customer service related. So if we go back into marketing and how marketing departments are going to handle this, is they have to have a very strong and robust business processes. And I'm talking business before technology. Technology is an enabler. If you don't have the business process to continue and to maintain this compliance and regulations, it will break down. So they have to have business processes to ensure consents are valid for marketing and that they are capturing enough information for them to do this marketing. For example, you might want to justify why do you need to capture someone's, let's say someone's birthday. You might be just providing a service that has nothing to do with the age or someone's sexuality or someone's interest in certain things. You have to start thinking, why am I capturing this data as a marketing department? I know it's a KYC, know your customer, it's a 360-degree view, but GDPR is really pushing you towards a more risk-based approach. It's expecting organizations to be more risk-based. So from a marketing perspective, consent is going to be really vital, and a very explicit, easy to read and understand consent. If they handle children information, it's even much bigger. So I guess companies like Lego, for example, they might have a bit of a hard time capturing all their customers' data as in the children. But even adults, you have to have clear consent, valid all the time for very good business reasons and business justifications. Now, going to apply that in Dynamics 365, there are a number of Dynamics 365 modules. Some of them are third-party add-ons, as we know, and there are others which are about to release, such as the Dynamics Marketing, which is now in public preview. The platform itself lends itself to you to go and do what you want with it, but the compliance is not just going to be out of the box. It's not going to be a tick box, yes, apply GDPR, and it's going to be as easy as that. No, they have to take it seriously. They have to design the process, and then they implement it in their organization and then in the technology.
So what about sales, people working in the sales part or using Dynamics, the sales modules as such? Do you see any specific implication for them that's different than that of marketing?
I think with sales, it goes back into similar scenarios with marketing, because one of the strong elements of sales is the cross-selling, the upselling, and this cross-selling and upselling to provide a good service. You have to understand a bit more about your customer to offer them a better service or a better product or a better customer experience. So that's a good enough business justification, to capture additional information so that you can cross-sell, upsell, or even downsell. If the customer is using a service that they're paying too much to, and they're under the risk of just leaving your service completely because it's too expensive, you might want to know, how much their budget, how much their annual income, for example. You might want to add more information, but you always have to have the business justification. You have to have the processes and the simple spreadsheet model that I talked about. Obviously, it can be a lot more sophisticated than just a spreadsheet. So it does apply to sales equally. It does apply in many areas. You can't call a person to try to sell to them. You can't do internal sales or telesales without having an explicit consent from them to allow you to contact them. Now, one of the biggest challenges is going to be for organizations who sell your data to others. So there are marketing organizations who capture customers' data. They have a consent with the customer data to capture it. But as part of that consent, they say, oh, we can sell your information to others. I don't think this. I'm not a solicitor or a lawyer, so don't quote me on it. But I don't think this will apply as the way it has been before. I think they will need to have better processes to say we might sell it to those entities for those reasons. And one of the GDPR compliance regulation and obligations is that when you do a consent, you do a consent for every entity. So imagine our bank example. If Bank A owns Bank B and you give consent to Bank A, that doesn't automatically mean Bank B has your consent. Unless your consent explicitly say, I give you consent, Bank A, and I give you consent, Bank B, to hold my data, you don't have that consent. So Bank A can continue to send you marketing material, customer service, whatever the consent is. Bank B cannot do any of that unless you give them consent. So the same applies with capturing customer data and then sell it on. How are you going to capture this data? Do you have their consent? Do they know who you're selling the data to? I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around this area.
So what about customer service? Let's say I initiate a chat session where they identify my name and let's say maybe a mobile phone number or a email address. For them to maintain that record of that chat with my PII information, is there going to be any compliance around that?
Absolutely. I think customer service might have a slightly less complex or less challenging job, but it's still equally important. So from a customer service perspective, by definition, you are already a customer. So you have accepted to, you've bought a service or a product from this organization. So as part of that, you're getting customer service. So the consent is slightly implicit. You might need to make sure that it is explicit, that you're going to provide them the service. You're going to contact them to check on how they're using the product or the service. So they still need to have that consent. However, where the challenge would come is that with customer service in this day and age, we've got the omni-channel challenge where you capture the, as you mentioned, I could be talking to you by chat as you're my service provider. I'm talking to you by chat, by email, by phone, by letter, by many, many different ways. I can even, you could even be doing voice recording. There are lots of ways. There's speech to text. There are organizations in the call centers where they have speech to text. So they capture everything I say and they store that in your data. So all of these channels have to be monitored and have to be part of any consumer right process or any data access request. So if we go back to my consumer rights, I have the right to be erased. If I go and say you need to erase me from your database, that includes everything. That where you don't have a legal obligation to hold it. So if I say wipe me out and wipe my data out, and you don't have to capture any data, then you have to delete the chat logs. You have to delete the speech to text, the voice recording. As long as there's no regulatory requirement to keep them, and I ask for that to be deleted, it has to be deleted. So that's where the challenge is. You'll have to have processes and technology to enable you to simplify and automate a lot of this kind of data gathering, whether it's a subject access request, it's just request to access data, a request to delete data, or a request to correct data. But then that even throws additional challenges, because some emails might be sent about customer A and customer B, and it's only customer A that is asking to be deleted or is asking for access to all their data. So when you go and produce all this information, all the emails, letters, and chat, some of the emails will be talking about customer A and customer B, in which case you can't send this information as is because you're giving customer A information about customer B who are completely not related. So you actually have to have processes to make sure that only customer A data, it goes to customer A, and you don't send any other customer information by mistake to customer A. So again, lots of challenges and lots of design challenges for any Dynamics 365 consultant or architect.
So just to drill in a bit more to the audit, currently Dynamics 365 audit out of the box does not allow for auditing for when someone looks at a record or has read access. I know this is something that many companies have been asking for a long time. Does auditing have any specific implications for GDPR?
Absolutely, because for many reasons, I guess. I think number one is you've got, as part of the right to be the data access requests, I want to know everything that you're holding against me, including your audit data. So I want to know who has access to my data, when they accessed it, and why did they access it. You can go as far as that. Previously, you could even charge for these kind of requests, but you can't. Now, audit is on the flip side of that. It's a good way to have one single audit module, if you like, to capture all the read access, all the data, everything about the customer, so that if you have to provide data access requests or respond to a data access request, you've got one location to bring all the data. So these are the people who have access to it. These are the people who did access your data, and this is when they accessed it, and this is why they've accessed it. So then audit becomes really important and helpful to provide some of the services that GDPR complies every organization to do. That's number one. Yeah, go on.
So just to be clear, out of the box, that functionality is currently not available in Dynamics 365, correct?
Yes. Yeah, so out of the box, this kind of read access doesn't exist, and that's where organizations before the 25th of May will need to implement that. That's number one. Number two, where audit also is a challenge, is around if you're capturing audit data for years and years in the past, where you don't actually need to capture this data, and there's no legal or obligatory or any regulatory requirement for you to capture this data. You have to have a process to wipe out audit about customers as soon as the legal obligation is no longer there. The other option is that you don't wipe out the audit data, but you wipe out anything or any PI information, any personal identifiable information about the customer. So you might have to say, user A has accessed customer X, but you actually don't say who's customer X is, and you literally refer to them as a GUID or as X. You might want to do that. But again, it's for the organizations to decide. None of that is currently available in a simple and easy to do way. However, with GDPR and with all the work that we know that's happening behind the scenes in Microsoft, I think Dynamics has a bright future in providing these services, hopefully in the future.
At the start, you touched on, the importance to get your security structure right. What about Dynamics 365 security settings? What's the implication in respect to GDPR?
So this is an interesting one because the security settings goes way beyond just the business units architecture or field level security. It goes into which data is accessed by which department. So I'll give you an example. One design challenge I had with one of my customers is they had hundreds of thousands of customers, but some of those customers are actually employees of this organization. So they are a customer, but also an employee. Now, you can't be sitting in this organization without giving, obviously, too much details, but you can't be sitting in this organization knowing that your colleague sitting next to you is in debt, because you're capturing this data in Dynamics 365 and you know all the customers who are in debt. But it's inappropriate to be sitting next to your colleague and you know that your colleague is in debt, or I'm sitting next to someone and he knows that or she knows that I am in debt. So this kind of information about the internal customers had to be captured in an isolated business unit with a standalone confidential team, a standalone team that only that team owns the internal employees' data, internal staff data. They are the only ones who have access to it, and it's a small closed down group that have the right. They know what the process is, have the rights to access and update this data, but no one else in the organization has it. So again, it goes back into applying those security settings in your security model. don't just think about, okay, I'm just going to hide using field level security. You have to start from the beginning. What's my org structure? What's my organization structure? How many business units? You might want to consider building a standalone business unit just for confidential data, and then teams within that business unit, let's call them confidential team and super access team or whatever. Those teams then own some of the confidential data that you don't want to have anyone access to. There are other options, such as using access teams. Access teams can give you specific access for a specific record. But if you're talking about hundreds of records, you might want to consider a separate business unit. Many ways to achieve kind of the same requirement, and different architects would have different preferences, but it's really important to do that at the beginning of the project. And if you are halfway through the project, take a pause, think about what you've designed so far, redesign it, reconsider it before you move on.
Lots to consider. How ready do you think Dynamics 365 community is, including Microsoft customers, partners, for GDPR, in your opinion?
I think I would say no one is 100% ready. But I think a lot of people, pretty much everyone knows what GDPR is, knows it impacts them, but probably doesn't know the details of how they can design the system in the most suitable way for GDPR. So when I do these sessions, I did them I just happened to be doing a lot of GDPR sessions in the past few months. Every time I start my session by saying, how many of you know or can say that they have all the basics or understand the basics of GDPR? Pretty much everyone in the room raised their hand. But then I say the next question, and how many of you think they know everything they need to know about GDPR and they understand it pretty well? No one raises their hand, probably not even me. So I think we're getting there, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we need to do more sessions, webinars, information gathering and workshops, information sharing workshops and podcasts like what you're doing here, which hopefully will help the community to understand a bit more about GDPR and start working hard on it.
So we're less than 100 days away from enforcement of GDPR on the 25th of May 2018. For those that are not ready, what's the potential enforcement measures that can be carried out?
Well, I guess the first thing is you have to be ready now. You have to start by the 3 areas that we discussed: personal identifiable information, consent, and the data access and data categorization. As a minimum, if you have to do these things, I know it's 100 days, probably less, but everyone needs to start working on it. One important fact that everyone has to understand is I was reading on the Information Commissioner website in the EU that it's not going to be a witch hunt. It's not going to be that let's go after everyone and try to bring as much penalties and much breaches as we can. This is not really the objective of GDPR. This is about making sure that organizations do the right thing in the right way. It's not a witch hunt. So when you take that into account, every step and every action you take to be GDPR compliant is counted for you. So if there is a breach, or even if there is an investigation without a breach, you can always show, for the past 100 days, we've done those actions 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 100. That in itself is good enough to say we are working on it. We might not have nailed it 100%, and I doubt everyone will nail it 100% by the 25th of May, but you're showing that you're taking it seriously, you've taken actions, and you're implementing it. This is really key for every organization.
Well, it's been good talking about GDPR. It'll be interesting to have you back on the show again in, let's say, a year's time, and when it's all in effect, and just see what's boiled out. Can you, just a final question here before we look at some quickfire questions, totally unrelated to GDPR, but what's your future predictions around technology? Where do you think we're going to be in 5 years' time?
I mean, I guess the first thing that would jump to mind is that technology will become a right. It becomes a right for everyone, to have access to technology, to have access to high-speed internet, to have access to apps and everything at the end of your fingerprint. It becomes almost like a human right. We all go through the phases where I've got no internet for a day or a problem because it really is, you feel like you're completely disconnected from the rest of the world. It might be good for some time as a break from the rest of the world and just spending time with friends and family, but it's becoming essential. So I would say my only prediction would be that technology becomes almost a human right. And also remember that technology can change people's lives to be better, not just on the financial element, but also on the social and the cultural element, because it opens up lots of avenues for people to meet each other and know about other cultures, get closer, understand that, we're all humans, we're all equal, and we have different ways of thinking, which is actually good for humanity. So I think there's a lots of advantages, maybe less wars, less violence in the world, maybe better financials, better standards of living. Technology can enable and help all of that if there is the will to achieve it. So I would say technology is going to be even more important to everyone than how it is now.
Okay, so let's get on to some quick fire questions. What books, blogs, or podcasts do you recommend most to people, and why?
Right. I would say Dynamics 365 podcast by MVPs is really interesting, and I'm not saying this because I'm on one of them, but I find it's very informative, it's casual, it's friendly, it's nice. You learn about new things, you learn about technology, and you talk to people who've been doing this for years and years, from before. So I would say MVP podcasts. As for books, if I have to quickly think of the best book, it's probably my early years when I was reading Tintin. I still like to read or watch Tintin from every now and then.
What about your favorite apps? What are they and why?
So I would say that the favorite app I have at the moment is Trello. I use Trello for everything. I actually use Trello now for my to-do list. I switched from Wunderlist, which I love as well. But the fact that Trello allows you to have lots of cards, and you can move cards from state to another, I found it very easy, even easier than Wunderlist, which is very easy, or Microsoft To Do. So at the moment, Trello and LinkedIn, I would say, are the two most used apps and favorite apps for me at the moment.
Do you have any daily rituals that kind of set you on the right path to a successful day?
I would say number one I do is I look at my to-do list, because I don't want to rely on my own memory to remember, what I'm supposed to be doing today. So I just have a to-do list for every day. In the morning, I look at it. That helps for the rest of the day. Number two, try to switch off your phone overnight, because if you work like myself and like Mark here, we work on a global organization, lots of emails coming all over the time. There's no 1 hour that no email comes through. If you don't switch off your phone and you just wake up in the middle of the night and you look on your phone, that's it. You lost your night. So try to switch off your phone overnight. Try to do it one day over the weekend, which I always do, and look at your to-do list in the morning.
What recommendations do you have for people wanting a career in Dynamics?
My recommendation is go for it. And don't hold back. So what I mean here is, don't think that, I'm completely new into this, I have no chance to set up a career in Dynamics. Actually not. Dynamics market and job market has a big gap at the moment, skills gap, and it's very open and it's very welcoming to everyone. There are lots and lots of free events, free community events. You've got the Dynamics 365 Saturday, which we discussed earlier. There's a CRM user group being held in every organization across the globe. There are summits, there are lots of training, free training and online training that will help you to achieve or to start a career in Dynamics. So don't step back and feel that, it's a big challenge. I would say go for it, reach out to people. I think there's a very helpful community in Dynamics, and I genuinely believe that. And you will see a lot of people willing to help. I mean, I have a mentoring program here in the UK to help people move into the Dynamics career. It's a completely free mentoring program that where we're always looking for mentors as opposed to mentees. But everyone can join it. It's completely free, and it helps you to give you guidance and directions, where to get the best learnings, what to do with your career and jobs and job offers, and where to start with your Dynamics career.
If you could redo anything in your career, what would it be?
Completely on top of my head, I would say start up my own business a bit earlier than what I did. I think I worked for so long for large corporates that I never really started my own business, and I've just done that in the past 12 months. So I would say I wish I would have started that a bit earlier.
Mohamed, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Before you go, if people want to connect with you online, where can they find you?
There are many ways. I think LinkedIn is probably the best way. So if you go and look me up on Mohamed Mostafa on LinkedIn, hopefully I'll come up in your search. If not, you can reach out to me or follow me on Twitter, MIMCRM. So that's my handle, MIMCRM, if you want to get in touch. Or you can just reach out through Dynamics 365 Saturday or any other group that I'm involved in. This has been a Dynamics 365 podcast focusing on the ingredients of a successful Dynamics 365 practice. Your host was Business Solutions MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as NZ365 Guy. For more information on this interview, show notes, feedback and resources mentioned, or if you know someone who would be a great guest for future episodes,
please go to nz365guy.com/podcast.